Peace, peace, peace. Welcome back to Selling the Record Straight podcast. It's your boy vicslanghope.
It's your girl Kai.
And today we're gonna be talking about, is there a war on masculinity? I'm saying so slash toxic masculinity. So that's gonna be the topic for today. And I would like to hear your take on it. Cause I'm the guy, so you don't wanna get me started.
Um, okay. Not sure exactly where I want to begin. Um,
Well, I could go first if you want me to.
yeah, can you?
Since you're looking for a little break or something. Um, but anyway, yeah, I think there definitely is a war on masculinity, and I noticed that, like, especially when you an assertive black man, I think that, like, people don't like that, and we can sit here and think about it as if it was a conspiracy, but like I think the feminization of, like, black men, and I don't care about anybody other groups, right? I'm talking about, like, black men specifically. I think, like, the feminization, like, we see it all over. Like, we see it in hip hop, we see it in TV shows, we see it, you name it, and all type of stuff, right? Like, encouraging men to wear dresses. Like, it's one thing if you want to do that, if you want to wear the dresses, if you want to do whatever you want to do in your household, if you want to come outside with your own little style. But I think, like, the pushing it, like some people call it inclusion, right? To, like, normalizing it, to seeing it on television, or normalizing it in hip hop, or whatever the case might be. But I think, like, the people who control the television, they control the media outlets, or they could salam, the people that are empowered, they kind of, I feel like they kind of, like, dictate what they show and what they don't show. Kind of like before I was talking about how they show was like black bodies on the ground when they're shot down or when they're killed. It's the same way they don't show us the white bodies, right? So I think, like, in the same sense, it's like they put a microscope on, like, black masculine men, right? Like, and then show them wearing dresses, or show them just doing things that, like, quote unquote, like, it's not like the characteristics of a masculine man. And I'm not here to get into, like, just people, some people will come and be like, well, I can use the term, but we're not talking about that. I just feel like that when you are black and when you are assertive and when you're not going for certain things, when you're standing your ground, when you're talking about your beliefs, when you are standing on your word, when you are just doing certain things, I feel like people get threatened. And then, like, I feel like it has brought about propaganda that is geared towards, like, kind of like telling assertive black men to tone it down. Like, you're being toxic, right? Like, you're being hyper masculine. Or when it's like the black community has never really fully experienced masculinity, right? We have false notions of masculinity,
Mhm.
which I also don't ascribe to the term toxic masculinity. I think toxic masculinity is also a terminology like black on black crime, right? Like, it's a terminology that is oftentimes used to attack masculine black men when they are being assertive and when they are showing these qualities that I just mentioned. People tend to use the term toxic masculinity to just look at these men who are not complying with the status quo, right? Of dumbing down their masculinity and their assertiveness. So I feel like that's why toxic masculinity is used, right? And it's coined. It's something that came out. Two gay white men came up with the terminology, right? Which I don't even know. Like, I don't know. I feel like I don't know why. That's a whole nother conversation. I don't want to get into that. But yeah, I definitely feel like they use the terminology toxic masculinity to kind of, like, attack masculine men.
Yeah. So I agree with you. I agree with everything that you said, specifically about the false notions of masculinity. And I think that I did an activity one time at this organization that I was working with, and that activity was basically for women to basically just reenact a man catcalling you, right? And in that scenario, every single and these women were from all different races, right? Like white, Hispanic, and black. And in these situations, every single woman um, was basically reenacting a black man, right? And so part of that is um, this idea that black men, when it's not even an idea, right? It's I think masculinity is unique in terms of the way that black men perform it, because the way that they're the way that they've been conditioned to be, especially in urban communities, is to be like extremely tough, right? It's to like these like sexual predators. It's to like show no emotions and like just to be like overly aggressive, right? And I don't want to completely. I understand what you're saying about toxic masculinity, and I agree with you in terms of like where that term derives from, and how these conversations oftentimes are used to kind of like is used against the black man in a way. But I also feel like there. I feel like patriarchy, right? When people talk about patriarchy, and I think this is the problem with feminism, right? Um, I think that the problem with feminism is that we leave men out of these conversations. And the problem with that is that men actually are affected as much, if not more, by patriarchy than women are, right? Like men are 4 times more likely to kill themselves, right? And why is that? Because men are not allowed to voice their opinions, voice how they feel. Men are, I forgot like all the different like statistics, but basically like, I feel like, yeah, kind of like my brain just went numb right now, but
Okay, so I'll help you out a little bit. Definitely. And this is why, like, I can agree. There are toxic masculine traits, right? And I think it's very important how we say things. Some people might say, "Oh, well, that's the same thing," and it's really not. Like, because I'm trying to show you there is black crime, right? But
mhm.
the phrase "black on black crime" is just something that is used to kind of like paint this magnifying glass, right? As if there's not white on white crime, there's not Latino on Latino, So it's like it's almost like it's said, like, look at him, look. It's almost to like divert the attention from like crime, period, right? And like how crime is associated with poverty, right? It's almost to kind of like do away with all of that, just to be like, look, the black people are doing this to the black people. So I think like the same way that phrase is harmful to black folks, I think toxic masculinity is harmful to men, right? Men who are trying to understand how to be masculine after being emasculated, right? For so many centuries, right? So then it's like, and like you mentioned, and so I think a lot of black men, make sure you like the video. So a lot of black men do have toxic masculine traits, and they have like, damn, I forgot the word, but it's just like it's misunderstandings or
It's
of how masculinity should work, right? So we have like these false, so this is the word, false notions of masculinity.
mhm.
So, and I think because of that, and I think like when we talk about toxic masculinity, it's like people never, these women, right? They never take into consideration that, what I'm saying? Like you talking about, and I made a post about this. I said that men suffer way more from toxic masculine traits than
And
women do. And I think like we don't talk about that. Somebody say, "I love your braids, honey." So and I think like we don't talk about that. We don't talk about how men are the ones who suffer the most, right? Men are more prone to violent acts from other men, right, than women, right? The men on man encounters, right, tend to be deadlier than the encounters with women, right?
I'm more
Um,
go to jail.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So we men are the ones that are mostly being mass incarcerated, going to prison. Men's are the ones who are leading in homelessness. Men are the ones who are leading in suicidal rates, right? Men's are the ones who are leading like in unemployment. Men are the ones who are leading in high school dropout rates. They are leading in so many categories, right? But these women will sit here and talk about that the women are the ones that are the main ones suffering from toxic masculinity, which we know, again, that term, right? Which is not true. It's not true, and it sends this message out like the men are already in need, right? Like these men are already in need because
let's just be specific, right? Like I feel like in a lot of these conversations with women, they're talking about white men and they're assuming that white men have the same powers as black men, and we know that not to be true, right? Like because of systemic oppression and all that so forth, right? So black men do not have the power to oppress black women.
Yeah, so definitely. And I think like that's another thing. That's another thing. Like oftentimes our sisters, they get it misconstrued, right? Like they be out here thinking about like, oh, it's just against men in general. And I think like you fail to realize that like your black man can't stop you from going to certain schools. Your black man can't stop you from working a certain way. Your black man don't even dictate what you should wear to work, or how you can have your hair, or how you can do certain things. So
Right.
I think like when we think about that and we think about suppression of like just the threat of a black man, right? Just like a black mother having a boy, like she already fears for him. She already has like, society is already viewing your young black son as a threat, right? They're already setting up school systems that are gonna land him in prison, are gonna land him in jail. So I just think that like when we think about it, we should think about it more from a sense of like, like you said, men should be at the table talking about these things,
Right.
but we don't get those things, right? And I think like I mentioned this in another video, because we have false notions of masculinity, right? Like some dumb old head is usually telling us like you got to be overly aggressive, and then like when your woman further emasculates you, you feel like you can't do nothing. The only thing you can do is be aggressive, and this happens with black men, period, whether it's another black man or if it's a woman. So I don't like, or it don't make sense when our sisters just try to make it seem like it's just black men mistreating them, because black men also mistreat other black men. So this is not a thing of, oh, the black men are just mistreating the women and
Women.
they out there in the street like just being mad nice to the guys. Like, no, like these people are literally killing each other over looks. They're killing each other over like stupid stuff, right? Over like stuff that doesn't even make no sense, right? Like, so I think like when we think about if we really trying to help our society and our communities, I think like we should kind of like try to understand like how the false notions of masculinity have impacted men and women, but mostly men.
So I think like when we talk about toxic masculinity, or if we're going to coin the term toxic masculinity, we need to talk about toxic femininity, right? Because oftentimes in these urban communities, at least from my interpretation, I feel like a lot of these men are not being raised by men, right? They're being raised by women, and women perpetuate toxic masculinity as well. So toxic masculinity is not something that is only um, central to men, right? Women perpetuate or men embody these toxic masculinity traits as well, right? So, like this notion of, or this expectation of silence, right? That a lot of men are expected to have, this numbness of emotion, right? This detached, I don't give a fuck attitude, right? That a lot of men are conditioned to have, right? To me, is actually toxic femininity, right? When you go inside of yourself and you do everything because there's no assertion, right? And like as a man, right, part of you being a man is like being assertive, right? It's the difference between being aggressive and assertive. Is you being assertive, you being able to stand up for what you believe in, and you being able to have a voice, right? To me, that's toxic femininity. And that's something that's oftentimes I see perpetuated by women, right? So when young boys are a young boy is crying, right? Or a young girl is crying, right? Girls are often comforted, right? And asked, why are you crying? And so on and so forth, right? While men, and usually I hear from women, oh, big boys don't cry, or you want to be a football player. Football players don't cry, or be a big boy. They're not given that same nurturing treatment that women are given, that little girls are given. And if we really want to be real, we really want to talk about the facts and who's raising these men, right? It is women, right? So like I said, I just think that oftentimes when people talk about toxic masculinity, often talk about it in terms of toxic masculinity is only perpetuated by men, and that's not true. Um, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I made a post like that one time, and I was talking about how like I was talking about how like people never think about who raised that man. Like people, and again, people be triggered. People be like, "Oh, you blaming the women, and you doing this," and it's just like, yo, you say that I'm blaming somebody does not take away from the fact that black women are raising these black boys, right, who are out there in the street talking to each other, being each other's role models, being each other's superheroes, right? So there's a bunch of black men without a pops, right, who were raised by a woman who exhibited toxic, aggressive behavior. Sometimes it's because you remind them of your dad, and your dad was no good. And you mentioned this before, right? Sometimes that boy be looking just like his father, and you hate his father. And then you just raise him with resentment, right? You don't even give him that nurturing. And then some of our mothers don't have that, right? Like they dealing with a lot. You know what I'm saying? When they and I feel like one thing I noticed is like when black women are raising boys, they be mad tough on them. Like they be like, I'm raising a man. Like, you know what I'm saying? And part of that is because they don't know a woman can't raise a man, right? And I think like a lot of times they be thinking like I have to be this way because I don't want him to be soft. I don't want him to be like, and it's like sometimes they overly do it because they don't know. You don't know. And I think even sometimes men who are in the picture don't know how to raise their children, right? Because sometimes their father wasn't in the picture. And then so it's just a messed up cycle, right? So if the father's not in the picture, it's a problem. Sometimes the father is in the picture and he's still not a father because he don't know how to be a proper father because he didn't have his father. So it just be a whole bunch. People don't be getting counseling, like parenting counseling. People don't be getting help. So it's just be like broken chains of like how to raise children. And I
Right.
think like definitely there's a lot of sisters who perpetuate toxic masculine traits.
Right.
Some of the most masculine people I met were women.
Right. So I think the problem with that, like I definitely agree with you, right? And I think the problem is that in a lot of our homes, right, within men, a lot of black homes, the average black home, we don't see men, right? We don't see men. We don't see, and if we do see men, oftentimes, very rarely do we see an accurate, real depiction, like of what a man is supposed to be, right? So when I think about masculinity, specifically within urban black communities, I think about it as a cult of death, right? And so, like, what I mean by that is that when we think about idols, right, or specifically from the time that little boys are younger and like what is depicted in terms of media, right, and we think about superheroes and we think about war heroes, right, what all these figures have in common is their ability to die for something that's greater than them, right? And your definition of a man is dying at the hands of something that's greater than you. Like that's literally like basically what young boys are taught from a very young age, right? Like the superhero comes, swings in, puts his body on the line for this woman or this person or whatever, or dying for somebody's honor, right? Same thing with war heroes, right? So I think that like when people talk about or when women talk about toxic masculinity. They talk about it in reference to women, right? And men commodifying women and men using and men like sexually assaulting women, right? And don't get me wrong, like men's conquest of women, right, is a part of that as well. But for some men, those men are not even in the race, right? Because like you think this is about conquest of women, and the only real objective to masculinity, and again, I'm specifically speaking in reference to within the black community, is establishing dominance over other men, right? So because what's a greater power than life and death, right? As a man, right? Like what I've seen is it's not about how many women you have, right? The men who were, yeah, you're a player, right? And you're known as to be the player around the hood and you get mad girls, right? But you're not regarded with more respect than the shooter, right? Than the dude who could walk in a room full of a bunch of men and demand that space. So for me, I think um a lot of men talk about masculinity, a lot of women talk about toxic masculinity, but what they're not understanding is that these ideas of the men that they're talking about, they're not even real men. These are not even the issues within toxic masculinity, right? Going back again to what you said about a lot of men, men suffer more from toxic masculinity than women. Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody asks, what do you guys feel about Kevin Samuels? I don't know in what sense. I don't know if this person's still on here. Primo, what do you mean? In what sense, if you're still around?
I could
But
kind of
huh?
I said I could kind of answer that. I feel like a lot of people ask me that. Um, he's kind of like Kevin Samuels is kind of like my fake uncle, right? Like in a lot of ways. Like I jokingly say this, right? But he's like to me, he's like the funny drunk uncle at the barbecue who just say whatever he want, right? I like Kevin Samuels. I think he's harsh, right? I think like a lot of his, I think it's hilarious. I'm not gonna hold you. A lot of stuff he be saying, he be cutting women off and like just doing how he's funny to me, right? And I think he's entertaining. That's why people watch him. And yeah, like I think also too, like we can even connect this to this conversation because a lot of people will complain about the way that he says certain things, right? You know, he's harsh and he have to say it that way, right? But we have Chef Gordon Ramsay. I don't know if everybody who knows that is that's you know whatever a British white European dude who will call people out of their names, who will throw dishes at them, who will act mad crazy over a plate of food, right? And that's okay, right? We have Simon Cowell on American Idol who is known to just be harsh and to kick people off the stage if they didn't sing right, right? And like that's okay again, right? Because why? Because he's a white European man, right? But then we have this black man getting up on here and not even really doing nearly as not being nearly as harsh in my opinion as these other two examples that I use, but he's so harsh. He could have said it in a better way. He could have. Why? Because he's a black man. I think it has a lot to do with that as well, right? And again, you're talking about this war on assertive black men, right? Because that's what Kevin Samuels is. He's assertive. And in all the scenarios in which I've watched, people watch 2-minute clips of him and then run with their ideas, right? Actually sit there and watch and go through a video, right? And usually his conversations don't go that way, right? He doesn't pick up the phone and immediately starts going in on these women. These women usually start speaking over him. They start not answering his questions, and they start to waste his time. And then he gets pissed off like every human being would. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely do. Yeah, I guess you tied it in perfectly. You know, you kind of have said that better. Definitely, I believe when you brought that to my attention, it definitely has to. I believe it definitely has to do with the fact that he's a black man. Like being that you just mentioned them other white people, them other white men who do that. I mean, people say stuff about Simon and whatever, right? Like that he's rude and he's this and he's that. But at the end of the day, like, yeah, people still gonna watch American Idol. People still gonna go watch Kevin Samuels. These women are still going to call in and go live. And then people, I don't know, people get a good feel of I'm gonna show him or I'm gonna put him in his place. And it's like at the end of the day, like, yeah, even me, right? Like sometimes I say, like, you know what, he could have said that differently. Sometimes he be wilding. Um, but I do think, yeah, I think he's definitely assertive. He definitely be putting people in their place. And I seen even a video with him and this dude, and he was just like talking crazy to this dude. He was like, I don't care how you grew up with your pops. Yo, make sure y'all like the video. But he was saying, like, I don't care what was your relationship with your pops, but you're not gonna come here and disrespect me. And he was like, and then the dude got mad quiet. He was like, I'm sorry. And I was just like, man, I don't care whose show it is. I mean, certain things is like, I don't know. It didn't sound like he was talking crazy, but like, I just felt like he was sometimes he just be doing too much. But one thing he did say, he made a very good point. He was just saying, like, yo, black people consume this stuff. Like at the end of the day, you don't have to consume this. At the end of the day, people sit here and they will act like, oh, but the media companies and this is what they're promoting and this is what they're pushing on the television programming and this is what they're pushing. And he was like, you don't gotta watch that stuff. You don't gotta watch that stuff. He said, ain't nobody forcing you to watch that stuff. And that was real. And I think like this is the same thing. Like a lot of women, a lot of black sisters, right? Like when they showed that video of him with the white woman, everybody was like, oh, he talking so nice to them. And I'm like, yo, you don't even realize he's not at work. And maybe he was being everything is speculation because everybody's going from, again, the clips, the little few clips they might have seen, or a conversation with black women on his platform, and they're trying to compare that with a conversation. You look like you want to say something to defend these ignoramus women, but look, and then it's like people want to compare his attitude at work with his attitude on some just free mingling.
Right.
I
So
think I think it's gonna be a different attitude.
yeah, so just to chime in real quick, I don't necessarily agree with everything that all these women are saying, but I do watch Kevin Samuels, right? Like I watch his videos, I tune in. I've been tuning into him for a while, and he definitely prefers uh other non-black women, I should say, right? And that's fine, right? And that's cool. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, I should say, right? But again, that doesn't negate the things that he says, right? Just because I may not agree with that spectrum or what he chooses to do in that realm doesn't mean that everything else that he says is not accurate, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that too. That's definitely true. Um, but yeah, I think a lot of people just I think black people as a whole, and we talk about white folks, right? We talk about white folks and accountability, and I think that like yes, it's hard for white people to be accountable, right? A lot of like white people have never even apologized for racism, right? Like they
What?
would say like,
Mhm.
huh?
No, go ahead.
They would say, "Oh, that was long ago," or they would say like, "Oh," like some people would even say they would call it something. They haven't apologized for slavery, right? Like they'll call it something else.
Because they're
They'll
not.
call. That's my point. My point is accountability. People are not accountable, and the same way we sit here and complain about white folks not being accountable, who y'all think y'all learned it from?
Mhm.
Y'all just like the white people. Y'all just like the people that raised y'all, right? You're not accountable. We sit here and talk about how white people are violent. Who you think you got it from? You're just as violent with your own people. That's the only difference. You know what I'm saying? White people was violent against white people. The same thing, right? White people was violent against white people. Then they got smart. Then they started pushing their violence on everybody else. And this is the type of things they was doing. And we kind of do it sometimes. Sometimes when we feel like it, we bang on the Spanish people, or we mess with whoever else, right? But for the most part, we bang on ourselves. You know what I'm saying? We still bang on ourselves. So I just want to say we're not accountable, and we learned it from a certain place. And I think that like that has to, when it goes back into when we talk about like false notions of masculinity, it's like at some point we just got to realize that like yo, we doing this shit to ourselves, man. Like and that's why I don't want to get caught up in the where it came from, the history. That's cool, but people stay there. People oftentimes bring up something, bring up poverty, bring up concentrated ghettos, bring up redlining, bring up a whole bunch of stuff, and stay there. And it's like, how can you sit here and talk about? And, I don't want to get into the whole thing, but definitely, I just wanted to say that like we gotta move from that. And like shit is just sad, man. It's just sad that like it just seems like we just we just live in the communities with our back against the walls. Like it's just like the people who are trying to do something better. It's like as you could work on your mental health, but then like if you live in the hood, you're experiencing like murder, right? You're still experiencing like you could be doing everything right, and then it's like you gotta come home to deal with the niggas, the nigga shit. You know what I'm saying? Like because there's whole bunch of people who are not doing their work, right? So they're shooting on the block, they're shooting in the parks. You know what I'm saying? All of this ties into false notions of masculinity, right? Like you get beat up, you gotta shoot up the playground because you couldn't fight, bro. Go do your push-ups. Like yo, when we used to lose fights back in the day, we used to work out. You know what I'm saying? We used to work out. We used to come back. That's just the type of stuff we used to do. Like, so I don't know, man. I just feel like it's just sad when some people are trying to work and do better, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff around them that is just like going down the drain, and it's just like you could just lose your life over some senseless stuff, just walking down the block because people are not doing their work. So it's sad.
Right. Uh, Somebody in the comments asked, does the assertive black woman, does she exist? And then said, or would she be under the umbrella of toxic masculinity? I think, and I make the distinction between being assertive and being aggressive, right? So I think people, I think for me, there's a difference, right, between being assertive and being aggressive. Being aggressive sometimes is needed, but a lot of times people use aggression in the name of being assertive, right? There's a way of me,
Or disrespect.
right? Exactly. That's exactly what I mean. So there's a way of me being able to stand firm in what I have to say to a person without me disrespecting them or without me alluding to me trying to cause them some type of harm, right? So I think there are a lot of aggressive black women, right? And I think there are some assertive black women, right, who know the difference. Um, so if that answers your question.
Yeah, I definitely think I think I remember I put a post up like this, and I was talking about like a lot of women think that like being strong is like being disrespectful, like being insufferable, like just doing certain things that they've been told that is strength. that it's like being assertive, and it's like that's not necessarily true. Like,
That
you know,
ties
like,
that ties into false notion of masculinity, right? And there's a lot of women who embody
yeah,
toxic masculine traits, right?
yeah.
Because
and
they
and that, and that
man,
and kind of like what you said, right? It's almost like how we have one without the other, right? Like how we have toxic masculinity, but there's no toxic femininity. Why there's nobody talking about it? Why there's like, and it's like, and this is another thing why I feel like there's a blatant attack, because it's like when you only talk about one side, like, and we not and we sit here as though, and we act like women don't reproduce this, and
mm-hmm,
we act as though like women don't harm men.
mm-hmm,
Why? Because women are not as physically strong, but yet in the same token, these women will be trying to say we equal or we the same,
mm-hmm,
right? But then it's like you when you pick and choose when you want to say like, well, the man has more strength, so he shouldn't hit a woman back. But why are we entertaining a woman putting her hands on the man first or
right,
at all? Right. So these are some of the double standards. And I think we have that on the list to talk about that. So I really don't want to go into certain things like double standards and like the different forms of violence, because we oftentimes just think about violence as something physical, right? We don't talk about the other aspects of it and stuff like that.
right.
Okay. So I think yeah, if you got anything else to say, it's 30 minutes. I think we kind of like, but go ahead.
Just really quickly, I think that, at the end of the day, nobody is born knowing how to be a woman or a man, right? Innately, we do have some biological characteristics within us, but nobody knows how to be a woman or a man, right? So, like, we are all energies that are like being guided. And I think like we need to remember that at the end of the day. And I think that when we talk about toxic masculinity, we usually are targeting men, and we need to be targeting, in reference to it, we need to be targeting a system, and a system again that both women and men perpetuate, right? So I think the problem with it, right, is I feel like a lot of times when people talk about toxic masculinity or women, right, we say, oh, men are trash, right? And like I literally heard a woman say, right, that she's trying to create a world in which no cisgendered men exist in her world, right? And that's a problem, right? Like we don't need to be exiting these conversations by saying men are trash and men don't need to exist, because that's bullshit, right? And again, going back to what I said, like we are all energies that coexist. In order for masculinity to exist, femininity needs to exist. We both balance each other out, right? So men, right, with being logical, with being reasonable, with being able to think in a very linear way, right? Women, on the other hand, have this ability to accept new things, right? To be able to be flexible, right? Both physically and both emotionally in their ways, right? And just a whole bunch of other traits that women have, right? And both of these energies combined create something great. So we don't need to get rid of either one of these aspects. We don't need to get rid of femininity, and we don't need to get rid of masculinity. We need to both first understand what femininity truly means, right? And what masculinity truly means. And once we understand these things, then we could both coexist.
Yeah, you said that beautifully. I just wanted to add to that by saying that, like, we both have both. Like, you know,
With that,
like 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 men have masculine energy and feminine energy, and women have masculine energy and feminine energy. It's just like men have testosterone and estrogen, right?
estrogen, yeah,
And women have the same. It's just we have
different,
normal levels, and then we have abnormal levels. With that kind of like cause a little change, right? Like some women grow facial hair because they
yeah,
have too much testosterone,
right,
right? Some men don't grow no facial hair, you know what I'm saying? Or they grow boobies, right? Because they might have a lot of estrogen.
yeah,
So it's normal levels, and then there's an imbalance. But like you was right, we both share the yin and the yang. We need both to coexist. So if you don't got anything else to say, okay, thanks y'all for tuning in. I appreciate y'all, and we see y'all next week. Peace.